Good morning and shalom. Before I begin, I'd like to thank Dr. Boaz Ganar and the leadership team and the staff here at the International Institute for Counterterrorism for inviting me to participate in this year's annual conference. It is a privilege, a true privilege, to address you all here today, and I am honored to be here to represent the FBI, both as a speaker and a guest of the ICT. As Colonel Davis said, my name is Jay Tabb. I won't bore you with the further details of my CV, but recognize that I've been in government service for 30 years, and I consider myself a career national security professional. I'll highlight the fact that my last job in our headquarters before assuming this role was as the head of our international counterterrorism operations, where I directed all of our activity for CT globally. And this was during the years 2014 to 2016, when ISIS was at its highest threat to the United States. Today, fighting terrorism remains a top priority for the FBI. The terrorism threat faced by the U.S., both by international and domestic actors, continues to persist and continues to evolve. I am here today because none of us can afford complacency in this fight, either with our individual nations or globally. That is why the ICT conference is so vitally important. Each year, hundreds of subject matter experts and stakeholders in the CT field descend upon this place from all over the world, leaders in law enforcement, security and intelligence leaders, private sector leaders, and academians. They come together for several days to engage with one another in one of the greatest displays of international cooperation the world has seen in the ongoing fight against terrorism. Terrorism is a persistent, global, and transnational problem, and although each nation may have its own unique threat landscape to navigate, our continued cooperation and collaboration is imperative to protect our people and our communities. My hope is that this conference and the relationships we form here will move us all a little closer to that ultimate goal. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the formation of the Counterterrorism Division within the FBI. The years leading up to its creation in 1999 tragically were marked by globalization of terrorism and a willingness by both domestic and international terrorists to use weapons of mass destruction to inflict large numbers of civilian casualties. On the domestic front, anti-government extremist Timothy McVeigh bombed an Oklahoma City federal building in April of 1995, killing 168 Americans. Internationally, the terrorist threat landscape associated with global jihad accelerated in the 1990s, with the February 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center and the simultaneous truck bomb strikes against U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya in August of 1998. In the past 20 years, we've seen the international terrorism threat evolve from a more sophisticated, externally directed plots, such as the 9/11 attacks sponsored by Al-Qaeda, to individuals inspired by foreign terrorist organizations carrying out unsophisticated attacks, utilizing vehicles in crowded places, small arms, knives, and the like. And we are seeing similar trends with both domestic and international terrorist actors in that these lone actors are self-radicalizing. Strengthen our partnerships across governments and with the private sector, especially social media companies, is more crucial than ever to thwart these attacks. Looking to the current threat environment, counterterrorism arrests in the United States are increasing, and the FBI is on pace to exceed the number of terrorism-related arrests for international and domestic terrorism cases from last year. On the global IT front, the U.S. remains highly vigilant regarding the threats posed by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Even after the organization's territorial defeat and the fall of its physical caliphate, ISIS has not been deterred. In fact, the underdog mentality, or the idea of enduring and expanding in the face of defeat, is built into their current narrative, a narrative that is aimed at Western audiences. We recognize ISIS's commitment to advancing attacks on the aviation industry, as demonstrated in the recent bombing plot, which was successfully disrupted by our Australian counterparts. They have proven they have the capabilities required to target aircraft and airports and are intent on advancing means to overcome security measures in those environments. We also assess the threats arising from unmanned aerial systems, or UAS, are very real. Both ISIS and al-Qaeda have repeatedly attempted to weaponize UAS, and we believe terrorists overseas will continue to use small UAS to exploit physical protective measures. The disruption of ISIS abroad brings unique challenges for all of us, with the dispersal of thousands of foreign fighters, including over 100 Americans, many of whom hold Western passports and can carry out attacks in their countries of origin. We are seeing plots within the homeland inspired by ISIS Khorasan, the organization's Afghanistan-based affiliate. An example of this includes the 2016 coordinated planned attack in which ISIS operatives in Pakistan, Canada, and the Philippines attempted a suicide bombing operation in New York City. A prime example of today's IT threat in the U.S. can be seen in an incident occurring just 2 weeks ago, again in New York City, when a 19-year-old naturalized U.S. citizen attempted to provide material support to ISIS. He was arrested on August 29th by the FBI after carefully planning to kill innocent civilians using a tactical knife, while filming and live streaming the attack via a body mount cell phone. The subject had shared with an undercover law enforcement agent a screenshot of a document which was his plan for the attack, the knife that he would use, and his swearing bayat to ISIS. Regarding al-Qaeda, its affiliates continue to garner U.S. attention. In Syria, the organization has been encouraging followers to indiscriminately choose targets for acts of violence in hopes of amassing as many Western casualties as possible. Within the Arabian Peninsula, its affiliates remain intent on launching attacks against the homeland and attacks against the West at large, advocating simple and inexpensive lone offender attacks through its magazine Inspire. The online propagandist Anwar al-Awlaki, although deceased, continues to inspire American and other English-speaking extremists to action. All told, al-Qaeda and its affiliates have grown to at least 20,000 members worldwide, the most ever. It is the responsibility of this community to remain vigilant, to continue sharing information across governments, and to keep consistent pressure on ISIS, al-Qaeda, their affiliates, and all to identify and disrupt future attacks. Despite ISIS and al-Qaeda forces, the primary international terrorism threat in the United States comes from homegrown violent extremism, or HVEs. These subjects are born or naturalized in the U.S., primarily radicalized in the U.S., have never been to the conflict zones, have never had significant contact with any foreign terrorist organization, and most have never been trained. Yet they represent an incredible threat to our country. An example of this extremism can be seen in the 2015 shooting in San Bernardino, California, where a married couple, inspired by multiple extremist ideologies and FTOs, gunned down 36 people inside a municipal government building, killing 14 and wounding 22. Fast forward 4 years, and our nation is witnessing a surge in yet another type of terrorism. If you've been tuning into any mainstream U.S. news outlet within the past few months, you're likely aware of the threat the U.S. is facing, not from beyond our borders, but from within, as we grapple with the unique challenges and devastation of racially motivated violent extremism. Across 6 days, in late July and early August, our country experienced 3 deadly attacks committed by domestic violent extremists in California, Texas, and Ohio. These attacks killed 34 people and left dozens more seriously injured. Active shooter attacks are spanning our country, and this year is the United States' most lethal year for violence inflicted by domestic extremists since 1995. When it comes to countering domestic terrorism, the FBI's primary risk is that of a lone actor who is self-radicalized and who has access to weapons. Lone actors are uniquely challenging in that they are insular, hard to detect, and we are seeing increasingly shorter periods between the lone actor's radicalization and mobilization to violence. The use of social media and the fact that it's no longer necessary to meet in person to exchange extremist beliefs and coordinate attacks makes identifying, locating, and disrupting violent extremists more difficult. This condition is aggravated when coupled with the persistent challenge posed by the increasing use of encrypted communication by our subjects. The FBI defines domestic violent extremists as individuals inspired by or associated with primarily U.S.-based movements espousing extremist ideologies of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. Within the FBI, we place domestic violent extremists into 4 categories. Racially motivated violent extremists, or RMVEs. Extremists in this category include threats deriving from bias related to race, held by an actor against a given group or people. To give an example, in 2015, Dylan Roof, a 21-year-old white supremacist, shot and killed 9 people inside a historically black church in South Carolina. And more recently, last month, a white supremacist targeting Latinos killed 22 people inside a Walmart in Texas. Violence targeted at religious or ethnic minorities may fall into the RMV category, even if the perpetrator is motivated by racial bias. Such was the case last year in 2018 when the active shooter opened fire inside the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, killing 11 people and wounding 6. Since 2000, individuals affiliated with racially motivated violent extremism have been responsible for the most lethal and violent activity in the United States. The other 3 categories for domestic terrorists include anti-government, anti-authority extremists, animal rights and environmental rights extremists, and abortion extremists. In recent years, there have been more arrests and deaths in the United States caused by domestic terrorists than international terrorists, and most of the FBI's open domestic terrorism cases are tied to RMVEs, or anti-government, anti-authority ideology. Of lethal attacks committed in the U.S. by domestic violent extremists since 2000, half were carried out by RMVE attacks espousing white supremacy. Within the United States, the threat is often leaderless and decentralized, very informal, somewhat disorganized, and it regularly lacks unifying leadership. Their structure and movements are considerably different from the decades stretching from the 80s to the 2000s, when RMVEs tended to join hierarchical, nationally organized groups. As I mentioned earlier, the current rise in DT, and particularly in racially motivated violent extremism, we are seeing a significant overlap between the radicalization of these individuals and the homegrown violent extremists. With both groups, the process often occurs online and involves a significant amount of self-radicalization. The internet and social media, when used for malevolent purposes, enables individuals with violent ideologies to engage other would-be terrorists in real time and with relative privacy while escaping the need for face-to-face encounters. Domestic violent extremists within the U.S., particularly those espousing white supremacy, can find plenty of material online, including propaganda produced by sympathizers worldwide to justify, in their own minds, their violent cause. Many of the countries represented here today are experiencing similar evolution of the threat posed by racially motivated violent extremists. The FBI assesses that the attack on 2 mosques in March of this year in Christchurch, New Zealand, committed by an Australian extremist, have and will impact U.S.-based RMVEs. The attack serves as a point of motivation or radicalization for would-be attackers, and we've noticed a tendency for our RMVE attackers to study and research the attacks committed by other white supremacists in the recent past, such as the attacks carried out by Anders Breivik in Norway and Dylan Roof in South Carolina. Facing this complex and challenging threat landscape, the FBI is employing a range of resources to counter the terrorism threat. As the lead domestic agency for combating terrorism, the FBI has steadily built and expanded a nationwide network of joint terrorism task forces. Each JTTF, as we call them, leverages the resources, skills, and authorities of federal, state, and local law enforcement and security organizations to identify and combat terrorism threats. There are more than 175 joint terrorism task forces in the U.S. They gather together investigators, analysts, linguists, and technical experts from federal, state, and local law enforcement. And together, they share information, investigate cases, and respond to incidents integrated. When a possible threat is identified, JTTF members explore all possible disruption and mitigation strategies, including federal, state, and local charges. In the U.S., about 50% of our subjects are charged with state or local violations instead of federal crimes. The FBI's efforts to disrupt plots left of boom is substantially strengthened by the partnerships and public trust, as half of the FBI's domestic terrorism investigations were opened based on information from either the public or from our partners, including international partners. This spring, the FBI added racially motivated violent extremism to our list of national threat priorities for the coming fiscal year. The move joins RMVE to homegrown violent extremism and ISIS Global as the FBI's most severe counterterrorism threat issues in the U.S. We've also participated in developing the Indicators of Mobilization to Violence, or IMVE program, which is a case management system that, when combined with qualitative investigative experience, is designed to provide a data-driven perspective to enhance our organization's understanding of terrorism subjects. The IMV takes a retrospective look in comparing investigative observations of radicalization and mobilization behaviors of past subjects to observable actions demonstrated by current subjects, thus helping us prevent an attack before it happens. Just as the FBI is committed to working with our local and state partners in the United States, we're also committed to our international partners as well. When terrorism strikes internationally, such as the shootings and bombings in Sri Lanka and the mass shootings at the two mosques in New Zealand, the FBI responds quickly, deploying experienced personnel and other investigative resources to the country of origin. Our international partnerships must include more than just information sharing. Where possible and where feasible, we need to integrate our counterterrorism efforts. We must pursue joint training, develop joint strategies, and extend our effectiveness by sharing our resources. In closing, I'm very proud to look around this room and see how many countries are invested in the same cause and the same solution. You all represent the masses of intelligence and security professionals, law enforcement officers, and private industry who are committed to bringing the best of our forces together to combat the global threat from terror. The partnerships we forge and fortify here today are going to make the difference when we leave this place and continue the fight against terrorism from our respective countries and organizations. As I've said before, terrorism is a transnational problem, and fighting it demands a strategy and partnerships that transcend borders. The FBI is committed to the fight, and we are grateful for your partnership. Thank you for your time.